Alrighty, so for week 4, as I talked about a little bit in attendance, we're going to implement now our calculate points module first, and then for 4.2 we'll display some output. So I guess the good news here, and this is where we start to repeat topics and code, because it is good to see it written several times and to understand the logic behind it. So for this, I already have my week 4 set up from attendance. I have my instructions set up here. And so what we're going to do in the app.js is just put a little content so we have that. And we'll put this up here. For now, let me see, I must not have grabbed the comment part. Okay, there we go. So in order for us to implement any module, right, we know there's a couple of pieces that have to happen, right? So we have to create the file, we have to import it, we have to write code in it, and export it. Okay, so those are kind of the general steps. So whichever way we do it, we need to just think about, okay, now what's the next piece? So like I could start this one by, which kind of makes sense, just creating the file. Okay, and because I don't want to type a lot, I'm going to grab that name. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to create, it's in the wrong folder. And that's always good to watch when you're creating files. So there's my calculate. So we're going to use this module to calculate our scores, because right now we have the form data for the inputs that we have, but we haven't done any calculation yet, which is really kind of the main core of why we're here, right? All right, so now that we have that, I could just set up, matter of fact, let's see, I think I have associated content for this one? Right, so in here, right? So in here, what are we going to do? This is going to be the core logic in calculating the carbon footprint points. Okay, we're going to calculate points with helper functions, which is really good. Because in this case we're going to get more experience with writing functions itself. So let's actually just write kind of the main one, because in this case what is going to be our main function, which is to calculate, right, the points itself. So calculate footprint. So just const. Now I'll do the export in a minute. So you're going to calculate footprint equal to function. For now we won't pass anything into it. Okay, so this gives us our starting function, and then for now we'll just say something like inside calc footprint function in the okay, calculator module. Okay, so this just gives us, that setup. So now matter of fact, I think I'll do this. I think I'll move this over here, because right now I'm not going to need, as of right now, anything in my form handler. It's all going to be done in my app and my calculator. So now in here, now I can import start as calc, right, calculator from calculator.js. I'm not sure why I didn't have a semicolon after these. Okay, so now I know I've imported it, right, my calculator, and now I can just make sure. How would I now make sure that I have them all connected? Remember, there's a couple ways, but ultimately in order for us to use it, we have to expose that function to the app.js by telling it, hey, this is an export, and now we're importing. We'll have, now this will be one of those that'll be interesting, because we will only end up with one exported function. All the rest of them will be scoped to this module. Okay, so that's good. Let's just see if we have everything connected and we have any errors. So here's how I would test that, as I would come up to here. And once I run this, which would be on page load, okay, then I could roll back over here and see, yep, I do see that calculated function, that again, I was too fast there, calculate footprint function now is the only function I have for this module. So now the question would be, where are we going to calculate this, right? Where are we going to actually call this module? Well, if you think about it, after we get the data from the form, then the next logical thing would be to actually call the function, okay? So we could, in this case, is we're going to set up, because just like we did on form data, we're going to return something, okay? So that return that we're going to do, so the question would be, what's the resulting, and the same pattern we saw up here, what is the returning object literal that I will have? And again, I get to determine what this is called. So I'm going to call it calculated results. It's going to be equal to, and now I'm going to call that calculator dot, right? And then remember, this is the editor trying to help you, okay? So now I'm calling that, right? And right now I don't have anything coming back, and this is again picking up the pieces of the way it's written right now. This would be undefined because I'm not returning anything. And you have to think about, what does it need, right? So what does this, what do we need to pass to our footprint function inside of our module for it to work? And the answer would be the form data. So in order to calculate our carbon footprint, we would need to know what that is. So this is your, right, this is your argument. And if you're ever not sure, sometimes I have to remember too, like the ideas of what we're talking about, right? So here's our argument and here's our parameters. So in here, this is going to be another case. We're over in here, we're going to call this not form data. We could, but let's just say for purposes of reusability, we call it something that's somewhat generic in case we ever wanted to run this with something besides form data, which you may in the future. So it just makes your code a bit more resilient, okay? So now we've passed it. Matter of fact, let's just see it. Let's just see it actually having that. Okay, so now we're here. So now I'm going to come over to my calculator, right? I'm going to put a breakpoint here. I'm going to refresh. And here, right? So, and you can already see this here, which would be, hold on. Right. Actually, let's do this again, because this is just setting it up. And it actually, right. It took me a moment there to kind of go, well, why wasn't it activating? It's because in this case, and again, these are pieces to kind of the puzzle to put together, because of where I'm calling it, it's not going to be activated until I actually click the submit. And so here now I can see that I'm passing it all my form data, right? And I'm calling it a locally scoped to this function within this module data, right? And I can see what that data is, right? But again, we called it over here form data because that was what we called it in our scoped function. But when we called it, we actually gave it a differently scoped variable name, but it is still a reference to that same object. Okay, so just having those pieces in place, again, this is a bit of a review, but reviews are always good. Now, because I have a return, right, after I run this, remember when you're reading code, right, it's going to run this. It's going to execute this. What comes back right now is nothing. So this is going to be undefined. So just to simulate the idea of what we need to have in place, let's do this, because we're going to actually end up doing a return. And again, we're going to do, in this case, a object literal. And we're going to give our first key or property footprint. We're going to assume for a minute, and we're going to hard code some data. So we're going to return total footprint with a hard coded number. All right, so we do that. Cool. So now, and actually what I probably could have done or should have done, and I would recommend you do, is actually look at, or like we could console log. Matter of fact, let's actually do that. Calculated results. Now, right now, and let's come over here for a moment and comment this out, just because as you start to more understand what's happening. So now in this case, I'm going to actually put my breakpoint here. I'm going to refresh my page, but remember I have to now activate this breakpoint because of where the function's at. And now you can see this is undefined, right? This has now run. Remember, if you're on line 22, 21 has already run. And on what happened here was we didn't return anything. So therefore, this is currently undefined. And if we just see that on the console, you're going to see it's undefined because it's declared but not assigned because there was no return value. Okay, so let's go ahead and uncomment that out. Go ahead and let this run again. Okay, now we can see we have an object coming back, right? And that object has a key and a value. Right, and so now we can, I think we'll get, yeah, we'll actually get that because I just, like we did up here, by not putting it in a template string, that just outputted the object. Okay, so now we have the pieces in place, which is great. So let's see, function calls. Okay, so we've actually done this. So let's see, this function orchestrates. I didn't put all the comments here. Okay. And this is just to understand what this one function, because we're getting ready to write then our first one. So it exports. Okay. All right. So again, we've done, and did I have anything about, yeah, return the breakdown of points of each category. And for now, and this is what we did, for now we just hard coded that 100. Okay. Okay, so now actually let's go in here, and we already did this too, right? And we already hard coded that. So now back in here, we're going to calculate our first input. Okay, so for points, so our first input is household size. Cool. So think about what we need for household size. Matter of fact, I should already have it up, so let me get it real quick. Whoa. Okay, so for counting the members, right, so count the number of members, and then based on the number of members in your household, you have a points assignment. So if you live alone, 14 points, and you can read through this. So now what we want to do is write code that actually determines, based on the input, again, this input here, right, here, and the number of people in home, we want to calculate your associated carbon footprint based on that. All right, so how would we do this? So in our calculator module, and I'm just going to go to here, right, we're actually going to write a function. Okay, now this function, and I'm just going to grab the name because I don't want to, again, the less I have to type when I'm talking, sometimes the better. So I'm going to do const calculate household points. Okay, is going to be equal to a function. Okay, and there's my function signature. Okay, cool. So now I know I have my function. I'm not exporting it because it's only going to be used in my calculate footprint total. Okay, and now I have to, do I have any comments for this one? Let's see if I have any comments for this one. Right, here we go. Okay. Matter of fact, we'll do this in a minute as well. Okay. So this is going to calculate based on that method 1, because there are actually multiple methods for calculating, in this case, carbon footprint. So now, down here, before we return anything, we'd want to call this, right? So we'd want to say what? We'd want to actually call the calculate how footprints, right? The points. Now you have to ask yourself, what does it need? What does this particular function, right? What does it need? Well, it needs something from the form, which we know is in the data. Okay, so we know we're going to pass it data, but specifically we're going to, and this is where it's really helpful because it's going to say, okay, what's actually, it doesn't actually do what I thought it was going to do, which is tell us the household. And if we don't remember, by the way, we can actually go reference what is in there. So household, I think this was members, but again, we don't always have to remember what those are because there's so much different data, right? So let's actually do this. And now that, and we could do the same thing where we just go here and roll back over to here. And so we have household members. It was household members was the property, was the key within the object of form data. Okay, so come back over here. So we're going to pass that. And so in here, right, we can just call it what it is, which is household members. Okay, and let's just console log out so we know if it's correct, right? Household members. Cool. Now, let's do this again. Let's come over here to our calc. Let's set our breakpoint here. We go ahead and activate the breakpoint by hitting submit. And we look, and yeah, it's 1, okay, which is what this value is. But just to make sure, just to, nothing wrong with this. Let's say it's 100, which that's a lot of people. Okay, so now, yep, we know it is actually working now. So imagine, too, before we start writing what this function needs, right? Ultimately, what are we going to do? We're going to return something, right? We're going to return a particular value. And if we're going to do that, then down here, what do we need to do? So let's say const household points would be equal to this. But we know until we do a return here, this is undefined. So now let's actually start writing it, right? So if we say if household members, in this case, we're going to do strictly equal to 1. Oh, not the string 1, because we've converted that input string into, we parse int it, we know what it is, and when we're writing an if, okay, when we're writing control structures or conditional logic, we know that we're going to do something. So in this case, it's pretty simple what we're going to do. We're actually just going to return, because if it's 1, okay, again, if it's 1, right, if you live alone, which would be 1 person, then what are you returning? You're returning 14. Got that? And then else if, okay, household members is going to be strictly equal to 2, then what are we going to do, right? Now, let's go ahead and do this. Return what? If you're not sure, go back over here, 12, okay? One other person, so that'd be 2, okay? So now this would be return 12. Now, this way of writing this logic totally works. Totally makes sense, right? So, and hopefully it totally makes sense. But again, this is the benefit of this week, is we're getting to repeat some of the things that we've been introduced to. So if this is true, then we return this. If this is not true, then we check this, and if that's true, then we return this. Okay, and this is the way, right? These are right our blocks here of if this is true. Now, one interesting way, and let's go ahead for a minute here and comment this out, because another way, and I want you to still have that in your code because I want you to see that, because another way we can do this is that there's only one expression. We can actually drop the curlies here and make this, a little more concise. So we could say, matter of fact, let me just grab that, okay? We could just say if, then we could say return. Right, so see how much cleaner that is? So if, and sometimes we just like things to be a little like easier to reason about. Now we could say if this, then return this. Okay? Now you get the idea, right? You get the idea of this, and there's not, and the only reason we can drop this is that we only have one expression to evaluate. If we were doing other things in here, which we will see in the future, then we absolutely, if we're doing more than one thing inside of this true branch, we often call it when we're looking at these conditional or control structures, okay? So now let's just go ahead and fill out the rest. Matter of fact, I'm going to make this a little easier on myself. I'm going to say if it's 3, oh yeah, I actually have this. So if you want to go look, if it's 3, it's 10. And I'm going to say if it's 4, it's 8. Okay, and if it's 5, okay, if it's 5, it's 6. Okay, and then if it's greater than 5, okay, so anything over 5, 6 and above, right, and then it would return 4. So you can see that in this logic, it is saying the more people you have in your house, the less the impact of your carbon footprint, which would make sense because there's a certain amount of overhead that just gets associated with that. Okay, so now the other thing we want to do here, and this is one of those edge cases that we talk about, is if for some reason we didn't provide it one of these, then we want to return 0. Now, this should not happen, but it's kind of like in case it does, let's just have it in there. Okay. All right. So we did this. I think we put this in here? Yeah. Okay. So we know that we have a parameter coming in, which is household members, right? Our parameter, or passing something to it, we're calculating our points, right? We're omitting the block eliminators, right? So that we know that we're doing this, we're omitting those. And we'll test this in a minute. We're just going to set up a few comments so we know, right? We've included, right? So let's actually do this. If it's 6 or more people, right? We know that. And then the default is or an invalid input, which, by the way, we'll learn about validation and why it's important and how to do it soon. So let's actually just test this, right? So matter of fact, what we could also do here, since we have this amount now in preparation, we could actually do comma. We could do household points is equal to, so that's the property, the key name, is going to be equal to what, right? Household points. Now, in this case, there's actually a thing we could do, which is to drop, but we're going to leave it for clarity right now, okay? So now we've calculated it. We've calculated the household points. We've returned a value, okay, based on that number. And now we've updated our return object literal with that. So now let's see if I wrote it right. Hopefully we did. Okay, so let's actually come up here and let's put, right, let's put 8. So in this case, calculate. Good. Okay, so we're here. So let's go ahead and step through. So we know it's not 1, we know it's not 2, 3, 4, 5, but is it greater than 5? And this is where you'll see, boom, immediately it evaluates this and it says, yep, return. And then that next line doesn't execute. Now we have that 4 in here, and now we can return that to here and have both our total footprint, our household points, and total footprint. Cool. All right, so make sure we finish this one. Oh yeah, so I'm going to actually give me more experience with writing conditional logic, because you really want to have some experience of doing this. Remember, the only reason we could have written it the way we had is we only had one expression to return. There's definitely going to be times when you're going to want to do more than one thing. So just understanding how to write this conditional, again, we call it conditional logic, but we also call it control structures. We're controlling, right? Or in this case, decision making. Decision making to me makes the most sense. I'm making a decision about how many points, and I'm referencing that because you are going to end up writing a decision-making app for this course. Okay, hope this helps. Do your create module and code household points for your Git commit. All right, see you on the next one.